Ladies and gentlemen, in this Red Gaming Telecom video, we're going to be discussing Steam and what Valve's vision is for gaming in the future. Their message is that Linux is going to be the future of PC gaming, and not only that, they are going to be very soon, on Monday in fact, unveiling their plans to bringing Steam into the living room. The company have said, and I quote, "Last year we shipped a software feature called the Big Picture, a user interface tailored for televisions and gamepads. This year, we've been working on even more ways to connect the dots for customers who want Steam in the living room. Soon we'll be adding you to our design process so that you can help us shape the future of Steam." Meanwhile, Gabe Newell, who is of course the head honcho at Valve, has been very vocal recently, criticizing Windows 8, and he doesn't like it for numerous reasons which go out the scope of this particular video, but suffice to say, he doesn't believe that Windows and PC gaming are going to be synonymous for much longer. He instead thinks that Linux is going to be the future, and of course OpenGL as well as other APIs rather than DirectX. He believes it for numerous reasons, but he believes primarily because of reasons such as, for example, the fact it's ultimately open source. He believes that it makes gaming cheaper. After all, anyone can go on any website. Well, you can just Google, an open distribution of, for example, SUSE or Ubuntu or whatever, and they cost you a grand total of $0. Completely free. Of course, there are some paid versions of Linux, but mostly they are, certain features, for example, server versions or whatever, for example, Red Hat, and go out the scope of what the needs are for most gamers. He also believes that it's going to also increase the chances and speeds of updates because obviously it's an open environment. That means that you don't have to go through massive due diligence processes. He actually believes that it took 6 months to get an app update approved by Apple. That's bad. I don't care no matter what way you look at this, and app updates being slow or costly or whatever has been actually a criticism of Microsoft in the past in regards to the Xbox 360. I'm sure you remember the whole fiasco of where gamers were literally, or should I say developers, were very annoyed at Microsoft and their policies, and obviously Apple aren't much better in this. Valve have already started to take things very, very, very seriously on the Linux front. They've already added in February 198 games to its Linux library, and in fact, if you look at a lot of games now, especially the indie ones, for example in the Humble Bundle range, you'll notice pretty much all of them often are compatible with Linux. Currently, Linux gaming, however, is still tiny. It's 1% or even less actually of the market. However, Valve are pushing this. They said, and I quote, that Linux the Steam to Linux was a signal for our development partners that we are really serious about this Linux thing that we are talking about. They've also done things such as contributing to the LLDB debugger project, and they're actually co-developing an additional debugger. Now, for those of you who are not too familiar with programming, it's nothing rude, buggering, but what we're talking about is actually processes to remove bugs and faults and so on in the software, because obviously there are some key developmental differences between, say, Windows and a Linux environment. Despite the fact that there are some, of course, similarities, there are also a hell of a lot of differences, as anyone who has, for example, just tried out a Linux box for a few minutes after being used to Windows for a long time will be very keen to point out. It feels very funny coming here and telling you guys that Linux and open source are the future of gaming. This is actually what Newell said himself. It's sort of like going to Rome and teaching Catholicism to the Pope, so bear with me. Now, it's very unknown what's really going to be happening with the Steam box. Some people early on especially believed that basically they were going to manufacture it, or they were going to get someone to manufacture the Steam box for them. This is becoming unlikely right now. It appears that, for example, the XI3's Corpse piston machine used to be the flagship device, but now the sources of both companies have said the relationship kind of is starting to fizzle out a little bit, and it's no longer quite to the point where it used to be. So what the heck's going on in that regard? Well, Steam, or shall I say Valve, have actually stated several times that they don't really want a Steam box. In other words, it's not going to be like you go into the store and you buy an Xbox One or you buy a PlayStation Vita. In other words, it's not a specific brand. Instead, what they want is to almost have like a certification process. So in short, it's going to be more like the old days where every hardware vendor has their own unique twists. There's going to be different price points and so on, but the key is to make something that's fairly small, lightweight, but upgradable, but very compatible with gaming. So of course that means that if you are someone who still wants to buy their traditional PC big ass box, which of course is what I personally use, then go ahead and do it, as long as you've got the relevant software. And I don't think Windows gaming is going to be going anywhere before anyone starts panicking and, formatting the hard drive and installing SUSE or something. Valve also added onto this, next week we're going to be rolling out more information on how we get living room unification and what are the hardware opportunities that we see bringing Linux into the living room, potentially pointing further down the road to how we can get an even more Let me start again. How we can get even more unified in a mobile. Sorry guys, this is what you get for that recording 3 or 4 videos in a row. So, yeah, it's quite an interesting choice, really. I'm not surprised that Gabe, of course, is pushing the Linux side of things. It's been fairly obvious that he's not really been happy with the status quo with Microsoft for a while, and it's obvious that he wants to kind of push the open source nature of things. Obviously, it's going to take big companies. We're talking the likes of, Electronic Arts and so on to really start pushing Linux. But certainly, once the smaller guys get involved, it no doubt is going to be a lot easier. Personally, I'm not 100% sure I'm particularly interested necessarily in the Steam box philosophy, because, well, anyone can build a PC, so that's all. Anyone technically adept can build a PC, unless, of course, it's something special. But I am interested to see their push towards the Linux side of things, and I'm very curious because, obviously, one of the big problems with gaming on PCs right now is if I spec you a PC, and let's say that PC costs £500, £400 to £500, then unless you've already got a pre-existing retail version of, say, Windows 7 or 8, you're going to have to fork that out if you want to do things legitimately, of course, which of course is what you want to do because of easy updates and so on. So if gaming becomes more skewed towards Linux, that's not really the case. Now, obviously, Linux does have a steep learning curve if you want to do things outside the GUI, and so I think that Linux still has a way to go to become less frightening, I think, is the best way to put it, towards newbies. I'm not saying Linux is necessarily hard to learn, but if the average gamer is very used to doing things on, let's say, Windows 7, it's going to be kind of a shock to even need to do something on command line if they've never touched it before. Not that commands are particularly difficult. Fortunately, there's a plethora of different forums, and most people on those forums are very willing to help you out if you do get stuck. I suspect, and this has not been confirmed, but I suspect that most likely they are going to want to write some kind of layer over the operating system to help obscure a lot of this stuff, and I have a feeling that they're also going to help to facilitate a lot of the transforms between, say, a binary for PC, and they're going to want to make it a lot easier for the developers to compile something that will run natively on Linux. Obviously, you can, however, do something using basically an emulator. I'm not going to go too much into it, but something like Wine, which allows you to actually natively run Windows applications on Linux, but you guys can Google that in your own time. Anyway, hopefully you've enjoyed the video, and we'll see you soon. Take care. Bye for now.